Hiya, I'm Devin the Firewolf, and I am a metalhead, if you couldn't already tell from my videos. I've been listening to metal music since I was a kid in middle school, and ever since then, my musical tastes have expanded a lot over the years, and as I got older, I kept getting into heavier and heavier music. And nowadays, one of my favorite subgenres of metal is deathcore. For those who don't know, deathcore sounds like this. The simplest way to describe deathcore is the fusion of death metal and hardcore. There's a lot more to it when you break it down, but that's not really what I'm here to do. Instead of going over a whole in-depth history of deathcore, I wanted to just slightly touch upon the evolution of deathcore, as well as my own personal journey with the genre. So the very first time that I ever remember hearing deathcore was in 9th grade, when a friend of mine at the time showed me this song called This Is Exile from a band called Whitechapel. I had never even heard of this band. He played me a snippet of it in class, and I was immediately put off from what I was hearing. He then went on to perform a deathcore scream in the middle of class, and everyone was staring. Yeah, it was really embarrassing. But that was my first true exposure to deathcore. However, it wouldn't be for another few years until I would actually start getting into the genre. The first deathcore song that I ever heard that I actually got into was from a band called Betraying the Martyrs, and the song was called Because of You. By this point in time, I had already gotten into metalcore music in middle school with bands like Killswitch Engage, All That Remains, Bullet for My Valentine, and Trivium. And then in high school, I started to get into other bands like Asking Alexandria, Attack, Of Mice and Men, and We Came as Romans. But then I discovered Betraying the Martyrs with their 2011 debut album, Breathe in Life, with the song Because of You, and I was hooked. It was heavy, it was in your face, but it also had clean singing during the chorus, which isn't always a common thing in deathcore, but it really helped the song stick with me, along with all the symphonic elements in their sound too. Another band that really helped get me into deathcore was when I discovered Chelsea Grin, specifically their song Lilith from their 2012 EP Evolve. Again, just super heavy, massive guitars, massive breakdowns, and surprisingly a clean chorus, which I think this was actually one of the only times they ever did that. But these two bands were really what helped me get into deathcore. Then in college is when I started to discover a lot of the other big bands of the genre: Suicide Silence, Thy Art Is Murder, The Acacia Strain, and of course Whitechapel, who I finally was getting into. I remember when I first discovered Suicide Silence because at the time they were arguably the biggest deathcore band around, largely thanks to their late and great vocalist, Mitch Lucker. I remember when I first heard Thy Art Is Murder, right when they put out their third album, Holy War, in 2015. I remember when I first discovered the Acacia Strain when I found a CD copy of their 2010 album, Wormwood, in a music store. And I remember when I finally got into Whitechapel properly with their 5th album from 2014, Our Endless War, which I believe is one of deathcore's most commercially successful albums too. We can march and down upon Capitol Hill. And along with all those bands, I continued to follow Betraying the Martyrs and Chelsea Grin and dive deeper into their discographies. And as time went on, my musical tastes kept expanding, and I just kept going heavier and heavier and getting into more and more deathcore bands, both classic ones and more modern ones. Because here's the thing, deathcore as a genre is really not that old. Bands back in the 90s may have been experimenting with sounds and elements that could have been called deathcore, but deathcore as an actual defined genre didn't really come up until the early 2000s. Thanks to bands like Despised Icon, The Red Chord, Deadwater Drowning, All Shall Perish, and Antagony. Then going into the mid to late 2000s is when deathcore really started to pop off, thanks to bands like Whitechapel, Suicide Silence, Carnifex, and early Bring Me the Horizon, if you could believe that one. Now, for me, I didn't actually start delving into the early years of deathcore until very recently. For a long time, I mostly stuck with the newer and more modern stuff that was coming out as I was getting older. That's when I discovered bands like The Browning, Immure, Lorna Shore, A Night in Texas, Enterprise Earth, Humanity's Last Breath, Shadow of Intent, and just so many more. I couldn't even list them all. And of course, just so many newer bands coming out today that I've been discovering and keeping up with that are just killing it right now. Bands like Disembodied Tyrant, Left to Suffer, Distant, Justice for the Damned, Darko, Slaughter to Prevail, and again, just so many bands I could mention. However, lately, I've been feeling the urge to go back and really start delving into the OG stuff, like these older deathcore releases from the 2000s that really shaped the genre. Now, of course, there were already plenty of iconic, genre-defining albums that I had already heard. Early Whitechapel with The Somatic Defilement and This Is Exile, early Suicide Silence with The Cleansing and No Time to Bleed, early Acacia Strain with 3750, just to name a few. But there were so many classic albums that I completely missed or didn't even know existed. So recently, I went back in time to the early 2000s and put together a playlist for myself of new, old deathcore albums to help me delve deeper into early deathcore. I actually got a lot of help and inspiration from watching Dickie Dines. They put out a video recently called Top 25 Deathcore Albums of the Last 25 Years. Definitely go check it out and show the guys some love. I'm a big fan. But using that video along with doing my own research, I gathered a handful of deathcore albums from the 2000s and early 2010s that are considered iconic, genre-defining, or just highly praised, and I wanted to just share my thoughts. I listened to all of these albums in no real particular order, but for the sake of this video, I'm gonna go in rough chronological order and go by years of releases. And keep in mind, if I don't mention a specific album, it's likely either because I've already listened to it, or it just didn't end up on my radar. So starting all the way back in 2002, one of the earliest deathcore albums I can now say I've ever heard is from the band The Red Chord, and the album is called Fused Together in Revolving Doors, released in 2002. So I had never heard anything from the Red Chord before this. I had seen their name and their album artworks over the years, but this was my first time really listening to them, and holy shit, this album blew my damn mind. Just listening to this early sound of deathcore years before bands like Suicide Silence and Whitechapel had even put out their first albums. First off, this album is just pure chaos. It's crazy, it's loud, it's heavy as hell. Very similar to that early chaotic sound that bands like Norma Jean and The Chariot would later do. And personally, that type of metal, like that very loud, chaotic, crazy sound, was never really my cup of tea, but there's just something about this album that just blew my mind and had me locked in. I think it's just thinking about the context of when this album came out, when deathcore was still just a little baby genre that hadn't really developed yet, and yet it's still just so damn good. Like, I was genuinely impressed. I think it also helps that over the last year, I've also been getting a lot more into death metal and even death grind, thanks to bands like Aborted and Cattle Decapitation, but that's a whole other conversation for another day. Next up in 2003, I checked out another band that I wasn't too familiar with, and that's All Shall Perish with their debut album, Hate, Malice, Revenge. Now, the only reason I was already kind of familiar with this band was because Eddie Hermida would eventually become their vocalist on their next album, although I was more familiar with him after he joined Suicide Silence. But before all that, we have their debut with their original vocalist, and God damn, this album is just heavy, it's brutal, it's angry, and it really just, again, blew me away. While some people may prefer their later material with Eddie, where things sound more developed and better produced, I just love how raw sounding their debut is, and I think it actually really adds to the intensity. By the way, the ending of that last track, Hurting the Brainwashed, just goes so damn hard. Honestly, I think one of the things that I've definitely learned to appreciate more these days is the rawness of these older albums. When I was younger, I really couldn't get into heavy music that had what I thought of as lackluster or just bad sounding production and mixing, but listening to all of these older deathcore and even death metal albums really helped me learn to appreciate it, because sometimes it's that rawness and unpolished sound that really adds to the aggression and intensity. Hell, sometimes these older, more raw sounding albums sound even better and heavier heavier than newer releases with more modern sounding production. Of course, I still like at least some production. I can't really get into that stuff that sounds like it was recorded in a cave with a single mic, if you catch my drift. Moving now into 2005, this was a big year for deathcore, and I checked out 3 releases from this year. First up is, of course, the one EP that is widely regarded as one of the most important and influential albums that helped define the genre for all of those other bands, and that's the Doom EP from Job for a Cowboy, released in 2005. Despite being from 2005, I can still say it checks all the boxes for what you would expect from a deathcore album, even if it does sound a bit outdated. Personally, I didn't love it, but I am glad that I finally checked it out. Also, I know that for how iconic and well-known Job for a Cowboy is for this EP specifically, I am aware that they did grow out of that deathcore sound pretty quickly after this EP and went for more of a death metal sound, even later delving into technical and progressive death metal. In fact, while I was working on this video, I actually went ahead and checked out the rest of their discography, and let me say, Ruination and Moon Healer specifically, oh, that was the good stuff. After hearing their whole discography, I think I can say that I like Job for a Cowboy as a death metal band more than a deathcore band. Don't know if that's a hot take or not. Another album from 2005 I checked out is from a band called Through the Eyes of the Dead, and the album is called Bloodlust. Now this one I had never heard of, so I went into this one blind, but I was actually pleasantly surprised. It was pretty damn good. Definitely leans a little more into death metal as opposed to just straight deathcore like the Doom EP, but it was still really good for the time and definitely had some really solid guitar work. And the last album I checked out from 2005 is another one from the Red Chord, specifically their second album, Clients. I thought it was good. Definitely felt more developed and focused compared to their debut, but personally, I found their debut just way more impressive for the time. Both albums are great, but I think fused together in Revolving Doors just stuck with me more. Maybe I'll feel differently with more listens in the future. Now, moving into 2006, I checked out 2 albums. The first one is Allegiance from As Blood Runs Black. Now, I had heard of these guys, and I had heard so many people talk about this album, and god damn am I glad I finally checked it out, because it was awesome. Just really good deathcore with fun and exciting guitar work that's still heavy and in your face, and the vocals are really good too. They have a really nice mix of that standard high-low deathcore type of vocal, but with a mix of hardcore in there as well. And the production is surprisingly really good for 2006. Like, I genuinely think this album still holds up really well today. The second album from 2006 I checked out is the second album from All Shall Perish, called The Price of Existence. Now this is where Eddie makes his vocal debut, and like I said earlier, I was more familiar with him as the vocalist of Suicide Silence after Mitch passed away, though not gonna lie, I kinda stopped listening to them after they put out their self-titled album in 2017, which, well, I think most fans and even the band themselves have kind of already swept this album under the rug. But The Price of Existence was also surprisingly solid. Eddie sounds great, and instrumentally, it actually did a lot of interesting things and wasn't just chugging the entire time. That said, I think I actually like the debut a little more. Similar to the Red Chord, I think I just like the overall rawness and aggression of Hate, Malice, Revenge. That said, both albums are honestly on par with each other, and I think both are just great. Now, from 2007, I had already heard some of the biggest and most iconic releases, like the Somatic Defilement from Whitechapel and the Cleansing from Suicide Silence, but one album from this year that I hadn't heard until recently was Dead in My Arms by Carnifex. Now, unlike a lot of these other bands I'm talking about, I was already familiar with Carnifex. Granted, I never got super into them, but I had already heard one of their later albums, specifically Slow Death from 2016. Now, when it comes to their more modern stuff, I'd say they're more like symphonic, blackened deathcore, whereas their older stuff was much more just straight up deathcore. And to me, Dead in My Arms reminds me a lot of The Cleansing from Suicide Silence as far as how it sounds. I mean, like, it really reminds me of The Cleansing. don't take that too seriously. Literally hundreds of deathcore bands basically played very similar stuff to one another. But overall, I really like their debut album. While they've definitely evolved into their own sound nowadays with the symphonic blackened death elements, it's cool to see where they started, and this album still sounds really good today. There was another album from 2007 I checked out, and this one was honestly just out of sheer morbid curiosity. Parasite from See You Next Tuesday. Another band I only knew about just from their name, but as soon as I saw this insane album artwork, and the fact that this album had 14 tracks and only clocking in at 19 minutes with just the most ridiculous batch of song titles, I just had to check it out. And yeah, it was definitely an album. Now, what I didn't know about this band until I did research and heard the album for myself was that they're also considered grindcore and mathcore, which are two subgenres that I've barely tipped my toes into. And I'll be honest, I really didn't care for the album as a whole. There were moments that I thought were kind of cool, but when it comes to the album as a whole, I could say it certainly wasn't for me. But at the same time, the whole thing was barely 20 minutes, so I wouldn't say it wasted my time, and at least I can say I checked it out. Also, that artwork is still genuinely really sick. I could cut it some slack just for the artwork. And now fast forward to 2008, we got Decimate the Weak from Winds of Plague. Winds of Plague is a band that I was actually already kind of familiar with, because a while back I had heard their third album from 2011, Against the World, and that was my first time hearing them, aside from the re-recorded version of the song Decimate the Weak that they put out in 2018, which is awesome, by the way. I thought Against the World was okay, not bad, it just didn't really stick with me, but after checking out their debut, I can say that Decimate the Weak is hands down much better. Despite it being older, I thought it had much better sounding production and just overall more interesting writing and better performance. I will say though that I found the instrumentation more interesting than the vocals. I feel like the vocals overall could have sounded a little better. I also know that Winds of Plague is brought up by a lot of fans for being one of the first deathcore bands they heard with symphonic elements in their music, which definitely helped them stand out at the time, especially on this album. Now there was another release from 2008 I listened to. I had already heard it before, but I honestly just wanted to give it another fresh listen, and that's the debut EP from Thy Art Is Murder, Infinite Death. Like I said, I had already heard this EP before, and I was already very familiar with Thy Art's discography, but over the years, my favorite Thy Art album always changed. But honestly, after going back and re-listening to Infinite Death, I think this may now be my favorite Thy Art album. Every track just absolutely slaps, and the production is really good for a debut EP like this, and the instrumentation is just heavy as hell. Now, Thy Art is mostly known for having CJ as their vocalist for the majority of their career up until 2023, but this EP had a different vocalist at the time named Brendan, and goddamn, can we just talk about his vocals for a minute? His lows on this thing are really solid, but his highs, I have never heard another vocalist sound like his highs. They're just so cool sounding. It's honestly a shame that he never did anything after Thy Art, but yeah, this EP is just an absolute banger from front to back. And while lyrically it hasn't aged very well, and I'll just leave it at that, I'm really happy I decided to give it a re-listen because it is just so good. Next up in 2009, I checked out Arsonists Get All the Girls, great name by the way, with their third album, Portals. Now, this one was a shock. Another band I had heard of before, I had seen their name around. I mean, with a name like that, you definitely get around. And their artwork is just absolutely nuts. But the music is actually a lot of fun. It's heavy, it's all over the place. Like, there's a lot of variety in the styles, and there's a lot of electronics too. It's like progressive electronic deathcore. And I think these guys may have just been one of the earliest examples of a deathcore band incorporating heavy electronics into their sound. That said, my first introduction to this fusion of deathcore and electronics was with the Browning. Love those guys too, by the way. They are just so damn good and still going strong today. I actually really did like Portals. It had so many fun songs. I will say, I feel like it did start to lose me a bit towards the end. Like the first 2/3 of the album are great, and then the last few tracks kind of start to lose me a little bit, but overall just a solid album that I highly recommend if you want something a little more experimental. And the last album in the timeline I heard during this little deathcore journey is from the year 2010 with the band Suffocate and their second album, No Mercy, No Forgiveness. Again, another band I've heard people bring up over and over again over the years, and yet I think they've always stayed relatively underground, at least compared to the bigger bands around in 2010. That being said, No Mercy, No Forgiveness absolutely slaps. This thing is just pure heaviness, no nonsense, just straightforward 2010s deathcore. Everything from the vocals, the instrumentation, the breakdowns, everything just hits you like a truck from front to back. Like tracks like Not the Fall and Holiness is Next to Filthiness just knocked me on my ass. It's so damn good. Definitely a good album to listen to when you're working out, trust me. And that's basically all the new old deathcore albums I listened to. This was a lot of fun, delving into all these older albums and finally getting to listen to a lot of these classics that even nowadays are still considered iconic and defining for the genre, and a lot of them still hold up tremendously well today. Out of all the ones I heard, I'd say my favorite ones were Fused Together in Revolving Doors by the Red Chord, Hate Malice Revenge from All Shall Perish, Allegiance from As Blood Runs Black, and No Mercy, No Forgiveness from Suffocate. And I still really like the Infinite Death EP from Viart. Thanks a lot for watching, and thanks for just hearing me out and letting me talk and share my thoughts and experiences with listening to all these deathcore albums. This is actually something I've been wanting to do on my channel for a while, just kind of sit here and talk about metal music. If you like this video, let me know, and feel free to share your thoughts on any of the albums I talked about that you've heard before. And hey, let me know if there's any classic deathcore albums I may have missed that you think I should check out. In case you're interested, I also made a playlist called 23 Years of Deathcore, which includes a handful of bands and songs I talked about in this video. So if you want to delve into deathcore like I did and see how it evolved over the years, go ahead and check out the playlist in the description below. But yeah, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys later. Bye!